human preoccupation with the vampire and the exploitation of its victim. The vampire is one of the most iconic creatures in the horror genre, with roots in historical events, to the birth of the modern vampire with the release of Bram Stoker's Dracula from 1897. Stoker's Dracula isn't the first iteration of the vampire, but likely the most well-known and arguably the most influential. Vampires are interstitial creatures that throughout time have had many different meanings and have taken many different shapes and forms. From reanimated corpses that rise from their graves at night to feast on the blood of humans, to lords that occupy a castle and torment their prisoners. In vampire media, one key element of the story is the relationship between the vampire and its victim. A lot of vampire media has this idea with the vampire developing its obsession with this usually female victim. Something that is exhibited clearly but in the relationship between Dracula and Mina, for example, in the original book. But why is it such a seller for the genre, and why do we as horror fans keep buying into it? Before we get there, allow me to contextualize this analysis. Let's begin by looking at Laura Mulvey's theory of the male gaze. This theory is one of the most important when discussing the vampire genre, especially in the context of which I'm discussing. The relationship between a vampire and its victim always implies something innately sexual. The idea of a man preying on a woman that is weaker than him is clearly displayed here. As Dolan states, ideology is based on assumptions about how the culture operates and what it means. And the historical implications of the power dynamic between a man and a woman is no secret. The vampire wants to own and control its victim, which is very indicative of gender roles of the time, which is probably my biggest issue with the creature. Horror is the perfect genre to use to break the conventions of reality and threaten these roles, yet the vampire is reduced to a predatory nature. However, this leads me to my next point, where I will likely contradict myself. To explain, let's have a look at the dictionary definition for monster. Monster is defined as a divine portent or warning. If we look at the vampire under this context instead, it completely reshapes the idea of the creature as a whole. Benshoff states Romero's project, the second of the Dead trilogy, may be considered the second wave of horror, using the zombie as a metaphor, closely associated with the exploitation of the female. While they're referring to zombies in this case, the idea of monster as a warning is in full force here. In Nosferatu, if we look at Count Orlok as a warning for the concept and consequences of the male gaze and the relationship between men and women, it completely reshapes his character. And it allows the audience to see something deeper and more important than just a scary ghoul that loves blood. This is where intersectional horror comes into play. The vampire film is intersectional at heart. Different people will experience and interpret the film in different ways, especially depending on race, gender, class, etc. While any film has a story that it wants the viewer to follow, there will always be something more to dig up. A female viewer of a vampire film will likely have a different reaction as opposed to the male viewer of the film, bringing us back to the theory of the male gaze. If we hark back to Nosferatu, the character of Ellen is haunted by her abuser, Count Orlok. When you get past all the illusions of what the film might be, it becomes quite clear to see that the film is focused on her exploitation. The film ends with her being forced to succumb to Orlok as it is the only way. This attitude of the only way a female character can succeed in horror is that she is exploited in a sexual nature is what makes the horror genre, and especially the vampire, just inherently sexist. Gwyn and Muller state thematic emphasis on suffering and victimhood are anathema to both the feminist political emphasis on female agency. Remember this statement from earlier? But why is it such a seller for the genre, and why do we as horror fans keep buying into it? Let's have a look at that now. So why are we so drawn to this? Well, for all the humans watching, we are naturally drawn to the more melancholic aspects of life. It is likely that the viewer of the horror genre wants to be disturbed and wants to be uncomfortable, and this comes from something more than just gore and fiendish creatures, but instead something real. A traumatic experience returning from the past to haunt you like no ghost ever could. So why put yourself through that fear, or more so sadness, again? Science Direct has an article that states sadness has an adaptive function, allowing us to cope. To stop beating around the bush, the relationship between a vampire and its victim is abusive, and that is the harsh reality that the creature is trying to warn you about. People with similar experience to those in the film can see that so clearly, and that is where the attraction comes from. These experiences I'm referring to aren't those of neck biting and losing the colour in your face, but rather seeing what you've gone through portrayed in a way that makes the monster appear so clearly, even in the most abstract of cases.